And without further ado, we'll ask Reverend Dee Dee Coleman to come and make some introductions.
Good morning, everybody. I'm a church fanatic. Turn to your neighbor and just say good morning. Good morning. Show all your teeth, even the ones that don't belong to you. Show those too. It is a good day to be here. It's a good day to be alive. And we are just so very, very grateful for the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews and the work that they are doing to make sure that Israel is safe, and all of the social justice components of ICFJ to make sure that the Israeli individuals strive for all that they can strive through the work that they are doing. And without any further ado, we will stay as timely as we possibly can to make sure that you have a full and compact day. We would like to first have our opening remarks by the Reverend Dr. Glenn Plummer. Dr. Plummer is the president of WLPC TV and the senior pastor of Ambassadors for Christ Church in Detroit, Michigan. He is the jurisdictional overseer of the State of Israel for the Church of God in Christ, and he has a long history in pro-Israel advocacy. Let us please welcome Dr. Glenn Plummer.
Thank you, Reverend Coleman. Good morning. Good morning. I just want to make some opening comments. I've been to Israel maybe about 12 times now. And one of the things that was most striking to me after having gone there maybe about, I think after about my second or third trip, is there were these black folk that were citizens of Israel. And I came to understand and know that these were Ethiopians. And these specific Ethiopians now number about 150,000 citizens of Israel. And their story was most stunning to me because I really hadn't understand. And I come to find out that most folk here in the States don't know the story about how these Ethiopians came about coming to Israel. But to let them tell the story, the Ethiopians, and I went to Ethiopia and traveled with a number of Ethiopian Jews to Israel with Rabbi Yechiel Eckstein, who's a rabbi of the organization that's sponsoring this event, and in Ethiopia, they all throughout the country, and it's not a religious angle that Ethiopia takes, but it's really just their story as they tell it throughout the country, is that they go back to the days of the Queen of Sheba and Solomon. And it is just a known story throughout the Ethiopian country, all over the country, that the firstborn son of Solomon was a man by the name of Menelik, who was they claimed the son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. And without going into all that story, I began to kind of look at the Ethiopians in a different perspective, so that the land of Ethiopia, as it's literally stated in Genesis chapter 2, some rivers, and it says, compass the land of Ethiopia. And as I continue just to look about how Ethiopia itself is mentioned both in the Old and the New Testament, it's very predominant as a people and as a country. I'm talking about Ethiopia, in that, of course, Moses had a wife who was Ethiopian. The first non-Jewish convert was not Cornelius, the Italian European, but was 2 chapters before, in Acts chapter 8, the Ethiopian eunuch. And so the Ethiopians, some say that they're the only African country that's not been colonized. Some may argue that, but they have maintained both the name and the presence throughout thousands of years. And in, I think it was 1984, there was what they called Operation Moses, where many of these Ethiopian Jews who were kind of discovered, as they say, back in the 1800s, up in the mountains of Ethiopia, that had been practicing what we would call Old Testament Judaism, even to the point of animal sacrifice and the rest. They had been practicing biblical Old Testament Judaism for some 2,000 years. And they had, many of them had left Ethiopia because of the political turmoil that had begun in the country in the 80s. And many went to the Sudan, some died on the way, and from there, Israel sent in what they call this Operation Moses planes to take these Ethiopian Jews from the Sudan, the desert of Sudan, to Israel. And they became, some of the first kind of formal citizens of Israel. And then 7 years later, Bush, Daddy Bush, was president, 1991. And they called this Operation Solomon. And from this, one weekend, Israel sent several 747-sized planes, took the seats out of the planes so that they can pack as many of these Ethiopians in these planes, and they airlifted with this was, I think, the Mossad, a CIA-style operation, where they came into Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, took thousands and thousands of these Ethiopians to Israel. And that became really kind of the foundation of this community and population that has now grown to approximately 150,000, where they are in every area of society, both the educational system, political system. They're members of the Knesset, the military, and so forth. And so, and now, from that, there are even Ethiopian churches that have now developed, who they are Christians. Some who have converted from Judaism to Christianity, others who were Christians and kind of Christian Jew combo from Ethiopia, who made their way on over to Israel. And so, just as kind of an introductory context here for me, that the connection for me with Black America is that there is both a biblical context for the support of Israel, and there's also a cultural context in terms of basically black folk that are in Israel that frankly need our support, need our help, need our allegiance, our alliance, and are wide open to it. And so the story of the Ethiopians is one of those stories that's generally unknown in Black America. The relationship, which we'll hear, I'm sure, later on, with us as African Americans and Jews in America, historically is founded and sound. But I think as pastors, as Christians, as those who may not have been engaged with Israel, there are so many reasons why we should be. And I just wanted to at least present one that maybe we don't talk about a lot, and that is these Ethiopians. They call them Ethiopian Jews, but there's also Ethiopian Christians who are there as well. And I think that lays a wide open door for us to reach out to Israel and to support them as a people, as a nation, as a land, realizing that we as black folk, we as African Americans, have a connection to Israel that perhaps you won't know until you go there. And so I hope, if you haven't been to Israel, that you take a trip to Israel as soon as possible and see and engage the people there. So it's been my pleasure to be a part of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. Over the years, I've engaged this organization, and I applaud the work of Rabbi Eckstein and George Mamo, which we'll hear from a little bit later, been there with them. George, I don't know how long you've been there, but you've been there a long time now, and a great Christian brother. And so, and most importantly, I want to applaud Christina King, who really is responsible for putting this together. And so, if for no other reason, we need to be supporting this for Christina's sake, because Christina said do it, and so we are. So thank you for the invite. Thank you for being a part of this. And Reverend Coleman, thank you for the introduction. God bless you.
Thank you, Reverend Plummer. I, too, had a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to go to Ethiopia. In 2013, I received a phone call from Christina going to a church for revival, and she stopped me with a phone call, and we were talking about going to Ethiopia, and the way she was talking as if she was going. And I was so excited. I said, "Oh, Christina," I said, "that's great." I said, "You will have a great time. I know it's wonderful." And she said, No, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews wants you to go." And I kind of slammed on the brakes on the railroad tracks. And I could hear the train coming, and I froze for a moment, understanding what an opportunity and a pleasure it would be to go to see that Scripture was unveiling itself in my lifetime. And as I went to a place called Addis Ababa, it was a place where I had never seen such poverty in my whole life. And in the middle of that place was the Israeli embassy. And then when we walked in the embassy, you can see beautiful flowers everywhere, just flowers. And they were waving to us as we walked in. Aiel Eckstein, who was with me, we were just so happy just to be there. We walked to this tent that they were waving for us to come to, and I was so privileged to see 450 Ethiopian Jews making their aliyah, their return to Israel, in their lifetime, praying all of this time that this would happen. And as we were on the plane, and it was just a wonderful and glorious thing to witness, and we were on the plane, and they began this shout, "I'm Israel high, I'm Israel high, I'm Israel high. The people of Israel live, the people of Israel live." And they could not believe that Israel was really there for them. It was absolutely fabulous. And they danced, and Rabbi Eckstein began to dance. And for those of you who know him, he had a pep in his step. And we were just so happy. So I just had to share that at this particular moment, in all the work that Christina King does in lifting us and keeping us straight. I am just so grateful to the International Fellowship for the work that it does in keeping the eye of the Christian and the Jewish people together. It means so much because we've been through so much. And you will get all of that flavor in the next two lecturers that you will hear. I am so privileged to introduce our first lecturer, none other than the Reverend Edward L. Branch, the senior pastor of Third New Hope Baptist Church. Dr. Branch has been pastoring since 1977. He has a membership well over 3,000 individuals. He has 3 locations, and he preaches 5 times on a Sunday. All the preachers in the house ought to say amen. Third New Hope is being recognized as the largest and fastest growing churches in Detroit. It is an awesome ministry. During these years, Pastor Branch has a boldness in his preaching. He will stop you in your tracks to think about the glory and the wonder of God as he preaches to the people of God and understanding who he is. He has a master's of arts degree in biblical studies, a master's of divinity in religious studies. He has a doctor of divinity degree from Ashland Theological Seminary, where the Edward and Linnell Branch Endowment has been established. Dr. Branch is a convention pastor. He is one that was the president of the Council of Baptist Pastors of Detroit and vicinity, my president, and he is also served as the president of the Baptist Missionary Education State Convention of Michigan. He is currently a great New Testament scholar, just to hear him. And I have pages and pages of his bio, but I want you to know that he is a brother beloved. He reminds me of David with the slingshot of education and a rock, and how he'll hit you with that rock. When you think you know something, Dr. Branch gives it to you in a different way that will just take you off your feet. So with no other further ado, I'm just going to introduce our first lecturer, and that is the Reverend Dr. Edward L. Branch, Senior Pastor of the Third New Hope Baptist Church. Let us all give him a round of applause.
All right, I'm wired up several ways, and we friends, right? Yeah. All right, so we gotta make this work. All right, so I'm gonna take this off. We gonna have to work for us. These things have to work for us. All right, so you gonna get it right for me. All right, real good. Give him a hand. He's gonna work with us. All right. Let me just say thanks to Reverend Dee Dee Coleman. Isn't she wonderful? Amen. Absolutely. She is certainly one of the most outstanding and prolific preachers, pastors, and leaders in this city and beyond. And turn it back up there. Go ahead. Don't worry about a thing. We'll be okay. We like to feel sound. All right. Turn it up. Yeah, turn it up. And once you get it up, then go get a seat. All right, okay. Thank you. All right, and so I'm very grateful for Reverend Dee Dee Coleman, and just thank her for such a gracious introduction. I'm also very grateful for Christina King. One more time, let's celebrate her. She's outstanding. And we are here because of her, and because of her commitment to this cause and her call for us to come together. Also, the Reverend Glenn Plummer, we know him around here, but this man of God is stalwart in this cause, and have made so many tremendous strides for bringing African Americans and Jews together, and I admire his commitment to it, his boldness, and as well as the continued relationship that he shares. So help me again celebrate Pastor Plummer. And all of you today, it's just such a joy to see you, and appreciate you being here. The members of the Council of Baptist Pastors, of which Reverend Dr. Dee Dee Coleman is first vice president, and Dr. Glass was with us in Chicago, and so was already a part of this fellowship, but grateful for them, for our AME family, amen, who is present here today, as well as those who are representing the Baptists. Amen, Baptists. Amen, Baptists. I was introduced as a convention preacher, wasn't I? All right, I said, I've never been introduced like that before, but whatever that means, we'll accept that. And also, Mr. George Mimo, who's here, thank God for him and the times that we've shared together, and also there in Chicago, and we'll be hearing from him later. And it's just an extreme pleasure, I mean a real extreme pleasure, however, I need some more superlatives to talk about that, to be coupled with Bishop Ulmer, Bishop Kenneth Ulmer, who's here, tremendous man of God, and who just blessed us so tremendously in so many, many ways all the time, and just a tremendous mind and spirit, and we thank God for him. And all of the pastors and ministers and leaders who are present in this room today, we just thank God for you. This is a cause to which we have given ourselves, and our commitment to it is relentless. We are serious about fellowshipping and sharing and expressing our alliance with our Jewish brothers and sisters. And while some of us need a lot of theology and a lot of other stuff to make it happen, there's others of us who just realize the call of Jesus to love each other. I mean, sometimes people get real deep about things and all of that, and why should I do this and then other. And sometimes I just say, how about John 3:16? For God so loved the world, his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. So it's just a joy to carry the love of God in our hearts, and that do in fact make a tremendous difference. I'm talking today about strength on the front lines of faith. I'll be sharing these few notes. Many of you may be already familiar with numbers of them, but I wanted to share this as a way of showing our connectedness to our Jewish brothers and sisters. And whenever we look around for who we're going to stand with, one thing I think is for sure, you stand with those who have stood with you. And so this lecture is important in my estimation, and so I want to share it with you today. Strength on the front lines of faith. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s was one of the pivotal events of the 20th century. It focused upon the citizen rights of black people in America who suffered beneath the heavy load of racism and oppression. Negroes, as we were called then, were second-class citizens, although the laws of the land provided for equal rights to everyone. But even with the laws in place, Negroes were still denied the rights to fair housing, jobs, and many of the other rights that belonged to them as citizens of this great country. There were public restrooms and drinking fountains upon which signs were placed denoting whites only or coloreds only. Segregation in public transportation was widespread throughout the South, where white people rode on the front of the bus and black people rode on the back of the bus. Restaurants, hotels, and numerous other businesses could and would often deny service to Negroes simply based upon the color of their skin. Local governments supported this treacherous system by refusing to honor laws granting equal rights, and often allowed the white perpetrators to get away with crimes against Negroes without any reprisal at all. Lynchings and burnings of crosses were known to be the practice of some of the white supremacist organizations like Ku Klux Klan, who blatantly determined to keep America white at all costs. News of black leaders being savagely beaten, lynched, or otherwise killed was almost commonplace. It was out of the backdrop of this oppressive and hate-filled environment that the civil rights movement arose. while there were efforts that preceded what is generally referred to as the Civil Rights era to overcome these bitter conditions, it was not until the early 1950s that any national organized strategies were employed. The emergence of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. marked the beginning of an era that would change things in America forever. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white man on a Montgomery bus. She was arrested on December 1st, 1955. And when the Montgomery Improvement Association was formed, they sought the leadership from the new pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The arrest and conviction of Rosa Parks sparked the Montgomery boycott. The boycott that began a few days later, which was December 5th, was successful, leaving numbers of city buses sitting idle while Negroes rode in taxis owned by other Negroes or walked, as many of them chose to do. Some walked as far as 20 miles a day. Later, when Rosa Parks was asked why she refused to give up her seat, she said in her own words, "People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired," Parks later wrote. But that is not true. I was not old, although some people have an image of me being old then. I was 42. She said, only tired I was tired of giving in. The Montgomery bus boycott led to numerous protests of the segregated conditions in and around Montgomery and soon spread to other cities across the South. Sit-ins and freedom rides and numerous other activities sprouted from the racism and oppression felt by black people during the late 1950s and early 1960s. With the rise of new organizations opposing segregation and the renewed focus of existing ones, protest marches became a part of the general strategy to bring the vicious and vile treatment of Negroes to the forefront in America. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, led by Roy Wilkins, the Montgomery Improvement Association, now led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and several other groups were on the front lines of the movement. However, the struggle for freedom was bigger than those individuals or organizations that headlined it. Included among those who joined in the fight for freedom were people of other races and ethnicities. The Negro problem was a problem that affected other ethnic groups, and there were many, including white people, who believed in justice and equality so deeply that they risked themselves for its sake. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel was one of those who took to the front lines of the movement for freedom during the Civil Rights Movement. Who was this bearded man? He's on the picture right here. The gray beard, the rimmed glasses, and a staunch appearance, who was on occasion arm in arm with Martin Luther King Jr. on the front lines. See, on March 25th, 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. led thousands of demonstrators from Selma, Alabama, to the Capitol in Montgomery. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, known as SNCC, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference had been campaigning for voting rights. It was to the crowd gathered at the conclusion of the march that King said, and I quote, "There was never a moment in American history more honorable and inspiring than the pilgrimage of clergymen and laymen of every race and faith pouring into Selma to face danger at the side of its embattled Negroes." Dr. King's emphasis on the fact that other races and religions were present is worthy of discussion. We do not know, however, we are free to speculate on how effective the movement might have been without the presence and support of our brothers and sisters from other races and religions. The front lines of the movement included a number of others who was passionate and determined to once and for all settle the race issue in America by standing up for freedom and justice. While it was the civil rights of Negroes at the center of the struggle of the 1950s and 60s, freedom and justice was everybody's business. It took courage and strength for Negroes to take a stand for justice and equality on their own behalf. But it took that and even more for those who did not benefit directly from the struggle to stand, as Dr. King stated, at the side of Negroes. Rabbi Abraham Heschel is representative of the Jewish participation in the civil rights movement. Rabbi Heschel was born January 11, 1907, and died December 23, 1972. He was one of the most influential religious figures of the 20th century. Born in Warsaw, Poland, he received his PhD from the University of Berlin in 1933. He was a scholar, theologian, activist, poet, historian, and author. He was a religious teacher in the prophetic tradition. He may be best known for the iconic photograph of him marching at Martin King's side, to which he later said, "I felt my legs were praying." Rabbi Heschel is the author of 10 books, Man in Search of God, The Sabbath, and numerous others. He was professor of Jewish ethics at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in New York City, after serving as an instructor at Cincinnati's Hebrew College for 5 years. According to one source, the Jewish communities of the South were rather small. The larger number of Jews who migrated from Europe occupied the larger cities of the North, like New York and Chicago. Most Southern Jews remained quiet and stayed out of the public square during this season of controversy over racial equality. Other Southern Jews were frightened to put themselves on the line and preferred neutrality. And of course, there were pockets of Jews, as there were of blacks, who disagreed with the movement altogether. However, with the support of Northern Jews, the voice of the Jewish community was heard loud and clear. If anyone were to ask the question, where were the Jews during the civil rights movement, the response would come loud and clear. They were on the front lines of faith. Our Jewish brothers and sisters have consistently been at the side of the black community. According to an article published by the Religious Action Center, American Jews played a significant role in the founding and funding of some of the most important civil rights organizations, including the NAACP, the Leadership on Civil and Human Rights, the SCLC, SNCC. In 1909, Henry Moskowitz joined W.B. Du Bois and other civil rights leaders to found the NAACP. And Kyvie Kaplan, a vice chairman of the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, now the Union for Reform Judaism, served as national president of the NAACP from 1966 to 1975. Arnie Arison worked with A. Philip Randolph and Roy Wilkins to found the Leadership Conference. During the Civil Rights Movement, Jewish activists represented a disproportionate number of people involved in the struggle. Jews made up half of the young people who participated in the Mississippi Freedom Summer in 1964. Leaders of the Reform Movement were arrested with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Augustine, Florida in 1964 after a challenge to racial segregation in public accommodations. Most famously, Abraham Joshua Heschel marched arm in arm with Martin Luther King Jr. in his 1965 March on Selma. One of my favorite quotes from Rabbi Heschel says, "Morally speaking, there is no limit to the concern one must feel for the suffering of human beings. That indifference to evil is worse than evil itself. That in a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible." We need not look far to discover the participation and presence of the Jewish community in the civil rights movement. Back on August 28, 1963, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, attended by more than 300,000 souls, was on the way. It was a hot day. Arthur Taylor Branch, no relations, in his book, Parting the Waters, described the day as such. Mounted in the eagle's eye of the Washington Monument, a CBS television camera showed viewers a thick carpet of people on both sides of the half-mile reflecting pool and all around the base of the Lincoln Memorial. At noon, nearly 2 hours before the rally, the police estimated the crowd at more than 200,000. From this official number, friendly observers argued plausibly that late arrivals and high density justified talk of 300,000, and the usual infusion ran it upwards to 500,000. But by whatever count, the numbers reduced observers to monosyllabic joy. Archbishop O'Boyle was scheduled to give the invocation along with numbers of other speakers who would have their once-in-a-lifetime chance to address this audience, and for that matter, the nation and the world. Among those speaking that day was John Lewis from SNCC, James Farmer from CORE, Walter Reuther from AFL-CIO, Whitney Young from the National Urban League, Roy Wilkins from the NAACP, and Martin Luther King Jr. from SCLC. But also included on that day to speak before this massive crowd was Rabbi Joachim Prinz, president of the American Jewish Congress. Listen to a few lines from his speech. "I speak to you as an American Jew," he says. "As Americans, we share the profound concern of millions of people about the shame and disgrace of inequality and injustice, which makes mockery of the great American idea. As Jews, we bring to this great demonstration, in which thousands of us are proudly present and participating, a twofold experience, one of the Spirit and one of our history. In the realm of the Spirit, our fathers taught us thousands of years ago that when God created man, he created him as everybody's neighbor. Neighbor is not a geographic term, he says. It is a moral concept. It means our collective responsibility for the preservation of man's dignity and integrity. From our Jewish historic experience of 3,500 years, we say our ancient history began with slavery and the yearning for freedom. During the Middle Ages, my people lived for 1,000 years in the ghettos of Europe. Our modern history began with a proclamation of emancipation. It is for these reasons that it is not merely sympathy and compassion for the black people of America that motivates us. It is above all and beyond all such sympathies and emotions, a sense of complete identification and solidarity born out of our own painful historic experience. Wow. Rabbi Prinz continued, When I was a rabbi of the Jewish community in Berlin under the Hitler regime, I learned many things. The most important thing that I learned under those tragic circumstances was that bigotry and hatred are not the most urgent problem. Listen to this. The most urgent, the most disgraceful, the most shameful, and the most tragic problem is silence. A great people which had created a great civilization had become a nation of silent onlookers. They remained silent in the face of hate, in the face of brutality, in the face of mass murder. America must not become a nation of silent onlookers, he said. America must not remain silent. Not merely black America, but all of America. It must speak up and act, from the president down to the humblest of us, and not for the sake of the Negro, not for the sake of the black community, but for the sake of the image, the idea, and aspirations of America itself. If any people could connect with and identify with the plight of black people in America, it's our Jewish brothers and sisters who, as Rabbi Prince said, possess a history of slavery, oppression, ghettos, hate, and deprivation, which is all so familiar to us. Rabbi Prince was purposeful in announcing the presence of thousands of Jews who were in attendance at the March on Washington. He highlighted the fact that their presence and support for the cause of freedom was bigger than what met the eye. For the Jews present and others who supported the cause, there was a complete identification and solidarity. I was moved by the rabbi's words on silence. There was a serious indictment of America in those words, an indictment that reaches through time and space to any and all who choose to remain aloof and detached in the face of injustice. It was a wake-up call for all of us. To further respond to the question of where were the Jews during the Civil Rights Movement, we can revisit the interview of Dr. King by Alex Haley that was published in the Playboy magazine. In it, Dr. King is paying homage to the many Jews who had sacrificed greatly for the cause of civil rights. The original text comes from the Playboy interview of January 1965. Dr. King stated in that particular interview, "How could there be anti-Semitism among Negroes when our Jewish friends have demonstrated their commitment to the principle of tolerance and brotherhood, not only in the form of sizable contributions, but in many other tangible ways and often at great personal sacrifice? Can we ever express our appreciation to the rabbis who choose to give moral witness with us in St. Augustine during our recent protests against segregation in that unhappy city? Need I remind anyone of the awful beating suffered by Rabbi Arthur Lelyville of Cleveland when he joined the civil rights workers there in Hattiesburg, Mississippi? And who can ever forget the sacrifice of the two Jewish lives, Andrew Goodman and Michael Swerner, in the swamps of Mississippi? It would be impossible to record the contributions that the Jewish people have made toward the Negro struggle for freedom. It has been so great. Dr. King recognized the presence, support, and sacrifices of our Jewish brothers and sisters during the movement. He knew of those with whom he held hands and locked arms. King remembered the Jews that marched alongside him and numerous others, whether it was in Alabama, Mississippi, Chicago, or Detroit. Dr. King honored those Jews who gave their lives for the sake of freedom and justice. Where we'd ask Dr. King, where were the Jews during the Civil Rights Movement? King would say, at our side. They were at our side. Rabbi Mark Sneyer wrote in his book, Shared Dreams, Martin Luther King Jr. and the Jewish Community, published in 1999, that for the record, the Jewish role in Dr. King's life and the movement as a whole was substantial. Dr. King counted Jews among his closest allies, and he identified strongly with the historic experience of the Jewish people against oppression since the biblical Exodus. He further stated that the relationship between Dr. King and the Jews was reciprocal. However, the Jewish community's engagement with the civil rights movement was complex. The majority of the Jews who went south to help blacks, who demonstrated in their own communities on the behalf of civil rights, and who gave money to the civil rights movement were neither rabbis nor Orthodox Jews. Most activist Jews were not religious. They were unaffiliated students, lawyers, and others whose activism was based in the Jewish ethos of pursuing justice, according to Rabbi Snyder. Since the civil rights movement, Jewish activists have continued to support the causes of Black America and have remained close ties with Black clergy and Black church. Numbers of local religious organizations have brought together rabbis and pastors from almost every denomination. Personal relationships have been forged, and meaningful understandings of life and faith have been at the center of interfaith connections. In the Detroit community, there's a number of local congregations that connect upon some frequency with the Jewish community. I was blessed to be invited to preach the Seder service for one of our suburban Jewish congregations, Temple Israel, located on Walnut Lake Road in West Bloomfield, Michigan. It was a learning and growing experience for our congregation and for me. The Seder service focuses on the Exodus. It takes us from slavery to freedom. I preached from the well-known passage in the book of the prophet Micah, the 6th chapter, the 8th verse. He has shown thee, O man, what is good. And what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. The service was held outdoors as the sun was setting toward the Sabbath. I shall never forget it and look forward to more fellowships with Temple Israel and Rabbi Josh Bennett. Many of you know Pastor Kenneth Flowers of the Greater New Mount Moriah Baptist Church, who have maintained connections with our Jewish friends through regular fellowships. He did so out in Los Angeles when he was there, and continued that upon coming to Greater New Mount Moriah here in Detroit. And we shared recently in a time there at Greater New Mount Moriah, and it was a great time with our Jewish brothers and sisters. And Reverend Dee Dee Coleman, what could I say about her? And of course, she can tell her own story. But she shares regularly with our Jewish friends. We've traveled to Israel time and time again as an ambassador of goodwill, and has welcomed a number of Ethiopian Jews to the homeland of Israel as a part of a special delegation. In January of 2013, a delegation of Baptist pastors representing the 4 national Baptist conventions traveled to Israel to see firsthand the conditions of threat facing our Jewish brothers and sisters over there. We visited the town nearest the Gaza Strip, only to realize that the citizens of this small community lived every day under the threat of missiles fired from so close that every home was required to have a bomb shelter. Being less than a mile from Gaza, they only had a matter of seconds from the sound of a siren until they found safety. At the northmost border with Lebanon, we could easily see that Israeli homes were within striking distance from the wire fence that distinguished their borders. In 1,000 ways, the history of African Americans and that of Jews parallel. And hardly anything in life ties people closer together than the pain of a common struggle. While the Bible gives us the history of the Hebrew Jewish record, we're ever mindful of our connection as the people of God. We are inextricably woven together in the human fabric, and our plight is to determine how to live and to work together. And Dr. King said it well when he reminded us, we will either live together as brothers or we will perish together as fools. When duty calls, we must not be found idle, or worse, hiding. We must take our rightful places on the front lines of faith. Our true strength is best shown when we stand together, arm in arm, against the evils of injustice and fight for the rights of every person to live out the fullness of their God-given potential with dignity and honor. We can continue to add strength to the front lines of faith by opening ourselves to learn about Israel and about the Jewish heritage. While the same call goes to learning about other people groups and religions in general, we should learn as much as we can about our Jewish brothers and sisters in particular. For Christians, Judaism is at the root of our faith. And we should also visit Israel. Our lives change forever for the better when we visit the land of the Bible. The Word of God opens and unfolds and blooms as we see the bodies of water and acres of land and the hills and the ridges of the Holy Lands. Then finally, on a more practical and personal level, we can take to the front lines of faith by building and maintaining authentic friendships with our Jewish brothers and sisters. We could all do better at this one. There's a serious problem when all of our friends are just like us. We should all have some friends who are different from us, who think different, behave different, and believe different. The differences that exist in our friends does not take away from us, it adds to us. It broadens our perspective, doesn't it? It enlarges our view. Be deliberate about building friendships with our Jewish brothers and sisters, because to us, brothers and sisters, they are. Rabbi Heschel and Dr. King met for the first time in January of 1963 at the National Conference on Religion and Race in Chicago, where they were both invited to speak. The two men developed a close friendship that lasted throughout their lives. They were often spoken of as kindred spirits. Rabbi Heschel was one of the only ones to give words of eulogy at the funeral of Dr. King. James Cone, the Charles Briggs Distinguished Professor of Systematic Theology at Union Seminary in New York, said, and I quote, "True conversion rarely occurs without an honest encounter with a victim. And what we need is more and more encounters, honest encounters, with people whom we have held suspect and have looked at in ways other than the way we look at ourselves. In this struggle for justice and freedom, and this struggle do continue, we must remain committed to goodness and righteousness. When the Apostle Paul realized that his life and work was nearing an end, he wrote in his second letter to Timothy, "I fought a good fight," meaning that he was a fighter in the good fight of faith. You see, Paul was careful to choose to fight on the right side of the battle, which was the side of good. And then he further said, "I finished my course." You see what the Apostle Paul was saying in the language of the Isthmian Games, which was the forerunner to what we now call the Olympics. He said, "I ran my leg of the race." See, in essence, he's saying, somebody passed me the baton. And so now I must pass the baton to somebody else. And then he says, I kept the faith. And when he made that declaration, he was referring to his faithfulness and perseverance, but he also added, in essence, if you keep the faith will keep you. So let's keep fighting for justice and freedom until we eradicate hatred and oppression once and for all. Beams of heaven, as I go through this wilderness below, guide my feet in peaceful ways. Turn my midnights into day. When in the darkness I would grope, faith always sees a light of hope. And then through all the dark and the yeah, I shall get home someday. Harder yet may be the fight. Right may often yield to might. Wickedness a while may reign, and Satan's cause may seem to gain. But there is a God who rules above with a hand of power and a heart of love. And if I'm right, say if I'm right, he'll fight my battle, and I shall get home someday. God bless you.